In my small town, schools taught mostly in my first language. English was just a side subject like art or music. Nobody gave it much importance. But I was curious. I loved listening to songs in English, watching actors speak fluently in movies, and seeing other people talk in English. It made me think, maybe I could learn it too. One day at school, my teacher gave us a speech to memorize. It was in English. I still remember one of the lines very clearly. It said, "Knowledge is power." Do you know what it means? It means when you learn, you grow stronger. Not in a physical way, but your mind grows stronger. That line stayed in my heart. I wanted to feel powerful. I wanted to learn more. But there was a problem. Speaking English made me nervous. Whenever I tried, I felt like people were watching me, waiting for me to make mistakes. And you know what? I did make mistakes. A lot of them. I said words wrong. My sentences were messy. But then I thought about the line, "Knowledge is power." If I gave up, I would never get better. So I made a small plan. I decided I would learn one new word every day. Just one. It felt simple. Not too much. On the first day, the word I learned was hope. Such a beautiful word, don't you think? Every time I got scared of failing, I would say to myself, hope. I told myself, one day, I will speak better. Maybe not today, but someday. Day by day, I started to collect words like coins in a jar. Small words, useful words. Words like kind, strong, and believe. Each word was my little treasure. Soon, I got more confident. When I got to 10 words, I felt proud. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a big achievement. Now let me tell you about a moment that changed everything. There was a girl in my class. Her name was Amelia, and she was great at English. She could write essays, read books, and speak fluently. To me, she was like a superhero. I wanted to be like her. But at the same time, I felt a little shy to ask her for help. One day, I got brave enough to ask her. I said, "Can you teach me?" You know what she did? She smiled kindly and said, "Of course I can help." She told me something very simple but so important. She said, "Don't try to be perfect, just try." That's how I learned. Those words stuck with me because I always thought I had to be perfect or people would laugh at me. Amelia became sort of my English guide. She gave me a tip I want to share with you. She told me, start reading small, easy books first. Don't read hard ones. Start with stories for children. So I did. I borrowed a book called The Little Red Hen. It is a very short story, but it teaches lessons about hard work. It felt nice to read something I could understand. Even though it was simple, I felt like the story was made for me. Soon, I made the library my favorite place. I would visit every week to borrow another book. I didn't understand many words at first, but I used a small notebook to write down the ones I didn't know. This was my game, to figure out what the words meant. I still remember learning the word grateful from a simple story. It's a word I carry with me even now because it taught me to be thankful for every step, even the small ones. Speaking English was still scary, though, but I found a trick. Amelia told me, talk to yourself in English. I thought that was funny at first, but then I tried it. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced saying simple sentences. I would say things like, My name is, or today I feel happy. It felt strange, but it worked. Little by little, I got comfortable. The more you speak, the more confident you feel. I'll share another moment with Amelia that I'll never forget. It was a public speaking contest at school. Everyone had to give a short talk in English. I was so scared, but Amelia said, "You can do it. Just speak slowly. No one expects you to be perfect." So I tried. I didn't say everything right. But do you know what? People clapped for me. That was the day I learned that trying is better than being perfect. The more you try, the easier it becomes. That one effort changed how I saw English. It became fun, not scary. It wasn't about being perfect or knowing everything. It was about improving step by step. I started to enjoy learning. Movies became my new teachers. I didn't try to understand every word. I just watched and listened. And it helped. The more you listen, the clearer it gets. Speaking to Amelia also taught me that everyone needs help. It's okay to ask someone for advice. So if you know a friend who speaks English better than you, don't feel shy about asking for help. They might give you great tips, and you'll grow faster when you practice with others. Let me pause for a moment and ask you something. Have you been practicing English? What do you find most difficult? Reading, writing, speaking, or listening? Comment below and let me know. It helps to share the things that challenge you most. You never know. Someone might have a helpful idea for you. For me, listening was the hardest part because native English speakers speak so fast. Their words felt like a train, too quick for me to catch. So I found a way to make it easier. I started watching English shows with subtitles. First, I read the subtitles. Then, I started focusing more on their speech. Over time, I got quicker at picking up words. The more you practice, the faster you improve. I'd love to share so much more, but let's pause here for now. Are you finding these small tips helpful? Let me know so I can continue the story with even more personal moments, struggles, and lessons from my English journey. Remember, the more you try to improve, the more capable you become. After practicing with Amelia and watching shows with subtitles, I realized something important. I didn't have to rush. Learning English doesn't happen in one day, or even in 1 year. It's like a puzzle. You find one piece at a time, and slowly, the picture becomes clear. I was building my puzzle, slowly but surely. One day, while walking home from school, I saw a shopkeeper arguing with a customer. They were speaking in English. I stopped to listen. I didn't want to interfere, but I was curious. They spoke quickly, and I understood only a few words. But even those few words made me feel proud. It felt like I was cracking a secret code. Little by little, things were becoming clearer. At school, our teacher gave us grammar homework every week. To me, grammar was the hardest part. Past tense, present tense, future tense, it all confused me. I mixed them up a lot. For example, once I wrote, "Yesterday I go to the market." My teacher corrected me. "Yesterday I went to the market." I felt embarrassed then, but I won't lie, it helped me remember the rule. Mistakes do that. They teach you. The more you learn from your mistakes, the stronger you become. I also remember trying to write my first English essay. It was only 3 sentences, but it took me an entire day. The topic was my best friend. I wrote, "Amelia is my best friend. She is very kind. She helps me learn English." Short, right? Yet when I finished, I felt so proud. I read it aloud to my family, and they clapped for me. Even the smallest achievements felt like big wins back then. Another thing I started doing was listening to English songs. Oh, how fun that was. There was a song I liked called Imagine by John Lennon. Do you know it? The words were simple, but magical. One line really touched me. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. It made me think, I'm not the only one struggling to learn English. There are millions of people like me. That thought gave me strength. Amelia once told me, don't just listen or watch. Try to copy. She taught me a fun exercise. She said, listen to a sentence from a movie or a song, then pause and repeat it. At first, I felt silly doing that. But soon, I noticed something. My pronunciation was improving. Words that once felt heavy on my tongue, like beautiful or opportunity, started to feel lighter. The more you practice pronouncing words, the easier it feels. One weekend, my family and I went to visit my uncle in the city. There, I had my first experience speaking to a native English speaker. My uncle worked with a man named Mr. Stephen, who was from England. Mr. Stephen greeted me with a warm, "Hello, how are you?" I panicked. My mind froze. But then I remembered Amelia's advice. Speak slowly and don't worry about mistakes. So I replied, I am fine. And you? It was a simple sentence, but it felt like climbing a mountain. Mr. Stevens smiled and said, That's great to hear. That smile told me I was doing okay. After that day, I wasn't as scared to try speaking English with strangers. Every interaction became a small victory. At the grocery store, I would say, Excuse me, how much is this? If I was at school, I would practice polite phrases like, May I borrow your pen? These were tiny steps, but all these small interactions added up to something bigger. During school holidays, Amelia gave me another tip. She said, Write a diary in English. At first, I didn't know what to write about, but I kept it simple. I wrote things like, Today I went to the park. The weather was sunny. I saw a dog. These were just a few sentences, but they helped me practice. Writing every day gave me confidence to express my thoughts in English. One interesting thing happened when I was writing in my diary. I started noticing patterns. For example, I realized that many words end in ing. Words like going, playing, and walking. These words helped me form sentences about activities and describe what I was doing. Little by little, my sentences grew longer. My diary became my safe space, where I could write without fear of being judged. A big turning point came when I discovered storytelling. Amelia told me, If you can tell a story in English, you can connect with anyone. One day, she gave me a very simple story to practice. It was the story of the tortoise and the hare. You know, the one about the slow tortoise who wins the race because the hare becomes overconfident. I practiced telling that story over and over again. First, I told it to my younger brother. Then I told it to my parents. They all seemed so happy to hear me speak in English. It was a very small moment, but it gave me courage. As I kept learning, I realized that English wasn't just a language. It was a bridge to new people, new ideas, and new experiences. Before, I couldn't understand English movies. Now, I could enjoy them. Before, I couldn't read English books. Now, I could take small steps into stories and learn life lessons from them. One day, I found myself in a group project at school. It was a science project, and we had to explain our idea in English. My team chose me as the leader because they noticed I was improving. At first, I felt nervous, but then I remembered how far I had come, from being afraid to say hello to now leading a group. I did my best, and when the teacher said, "Good job," I felt so proud. Now, as I share this story with you, I want you to know that my journey is not finished. Even today, I learn new words. I still make mistakes, but the difference is that I'm not afraid of them anymore. I see mistakes as teachers. Each mistake I make takes me one step closer to becoming better. As my journey continued, I began to notice something powerful. Every time I worked on improving my English, even in small ways, I felt a little braver. It was like climbing a staircase. I couldn't jump to the top all at once. Instead, I had to take one step at a time. Some steps were easy, some were hard, but every step brought me closer to my goal. I also started enjoying English in fun ways. For example, I liked playing word games with Amelia. She would pick a letter, and we had to think of as many English words as we could that started with that letter. Once, she picked B. I came up with book, bright, and brave. Amelia smiled and said, "You are getting quicker." That made me feel proud. It also showed me that learning doesn't always have to feel like work. It can feel like play. But you know, it wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt stuck. I would forget words I had just learned. Sometimes I couldn't pronounce a word no matter how many times I tried. For example, the word comfortable was tricky for me. I would say it wrong over and over again. It felt frustrating. But instead of giving up, I broke the word into parts. Comfortable. I said it slowly at first, then faster. Over time, it became natural. This taught me that patience is one of the most important skills in learning English. The more you practice patience, the calmer you feel. One funny thing happened during this time. My little brother, who didn't know much English, started copying me. If I said thank you, he would say thank you. If I said good morning, he would repeat it. I realized something then. When you practice in front of others, you also inspire them, and their encouragement inspires you back. Little moments like these kept me motivated. At school, our English teacher gave us a special assignment. She told us to write a letter to a pen pal, someone from another school who we didn't know. We had to write in English. I thought about all the words I had learned and all the sentences I had practiced. I wrote a short and simple letter introducing myself. I said, "Hello, my name is my name. I live in a small town. I like reading books and learning new things." When my teacher read it, she said, "See? You're improving." That simple praise felt like winning a medal. Speaking of praise, one of the most important things I learned during this journey was how to praise myself. Sometimes we wait for others to tell us, "Good job," but I started telling myself, "You're doing well." Even if I only learned one word or wrote one good sentence, I would say to myself, "You're getting better." Self-praise is powerful, and I encourage you to try it too. One day, Amelia brought me a special book. It was a book of famous quotes. She said, "Quotes are short, but they teach big lessons. They also help you learn new words." One quote I loved was from Helen Keller. It said, "Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much." I thought about how true that was. My journey wasn't just my journey. It was also thanks to Amelia, my teachers, my family, and even my own younger brother who repeated my words every day. We learn better when we learn together. Another quote that stayed with me was, "Every expert was once a beginner." Do you know what that means? It means nobody starts out perfect. Even great speakers, writers, and teachers had to take small steps like you and me. Whenever I felt discouraged, I would repeat that quote to myself. It reminded me that being a beginner is not a weakness. It's a beginning. As time passed, I started dreaming of bigger goals. I wanted to sound more fluent when I spoke. So, I made a new habit. Every evening I would stand in my room and read aloud from a book. At first it felt strange. My voice sounded funny to me and I stumbled over words. But after some time I noticed improvement. My words came out smoother. The more you read aloud, the stronger your confidence becomes. One very special moment happened when we had guests over at our house. One of the guests, a family friend, started speaking to me in English. He asked, "What do you want to do in the future?" My heart raced, but I gathered my courage and answered. I said, "I want to be a teacher." He nodded and smiled. That small conversation reminded me why I was learning English. It wasn't just for school. It was for life. It was so I could share my thoughts and dreams with people from all over the world. There was another important thing I learned on this journey. I learned to celebrate mistakes. Yes, you heard that right. Celebrate them. Once, I tried saying the word photograph, but accidentally said photo giraffe. Amelia laughed, and so did I. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I smiled and tried again. Mistakes became my friends because they pushed me to do better the next time. The more you embrace mistakes, the easier it feels to keep going. At this point, I had discovered so many ways to practice English: speaking to friends, writing in my diary, reading books, and even singing songs. But one more thing helped me a lot: listening to podcasts and recordings. At first, I didn't understand much. The speakers talked so fast, but I kept listening. Day by day, my ears got sharper. The more you listen, the clearer it gets. One afternoon, Amelia told me about an exciting opportunity. Our school was hosting a small event where students could perform skits in different languages, including English. She asked me if I wanted to join her group. I hesitated. Performing on stage felt scary, but Amelia said, "Don't worry, we'll practice together." So, I said yes. For the next 2 weeks, we rehearsed after school. We chose a simple story about friendship. My lines were short, but I practiced them 100 times. On the day of the event, I was so nervous that my hands were shaking. But as I went on stage, I told myself, just try your best. When I spoke my lines, I could see my family and teachers smiling in the audience. That boosted my confidence. By the end of the skit, I felt so proud of myself. It was another small victory that meant so much to me. As I reflect on everything I learned, one message stands out. Progress comes little by little. You don't have to master everything at once. Focus on one word, one sentence, or one idea at a time. Soon you'll look back and be amazed at how far you've come. As days turned into months, my journey with English became more like a habit, a daily practice, like brushing my teeth or eating lunch. At first, it wasn't easy to stay consistent. Life can get busy, and I had moments when I felt tired or unmotivated. But do you know what helped? Amelia once said to me, "Even if it's just 5 minutes, do something in English every day. Small steps count." That advice changed the way I looked at learning. It wasn't about spending big chunks of time all at once. It was about showing up every day, even just for a little while. By now, I had started to discover the beauty of the English language. I remember noticing how some words sounded so poetic. Words like serendipity and wander fascinated me. Of course, I didn't use these words in everyday conversations back then, but I loved writing them down in my notebook and looking at them. They made me feel like I was unlocking something special. Sometimes, words do that. They stick with you because of how they feel or sound. If you've ever come across a word that made you curious, write it down. That word might become one of your favorites. One event that I will never forget happened at a school library day. I stumbled upon a book called Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. It had simple language, but the story felt so magical. I started reading it slowly, using my dictionary for words I didn't understand, like barn, web, and friendship. While reading, I met the characters, Wilbur the pig and Charlotte the spider, who became my companions in this English journey. Each chapter felt like exploring a new world. This was the first time I realized how reading could transport you to places you'd never been before. The more I read, the stronger my vocabulary became. Reading books also taught me the importance of context. Sometimes I wouldn't stop to check every word I didn't know. Instead, I tried to guess its meaning from the sentence around it. For example, when I read, Wilbur stared at the barn in wonder, I didn't know exactly what wonder meant. But by looking at the whole sentence, I understood that Wilbur was amazed or curious. Guessing from context became a powerful skill that saved time and made learning more natural. You can try this too. Next time you see a word you don't understand, try to imagine what it means before checking the dictionary. As I explored English more, I became fascinated with how words can connect people. One day, a new student joined our class. Her name was Hazel, and she had just moved from another country. Her English was fluent, but her first language was different from mine. I decided to say hello. I said, "Hi, my name is... my name. Nice to meet you." Hazel smiled and replied, "Nice to meet you too." That one greeting turned into a friendship. We didn't come from the same background, but English became our bridge. It taught me that learning a language isn't just about words. It's about building relationships. Hazel introduced me to something new, journaling. She told me, "Every night I write one good thing that happened to me during the day." This idea excited me. I loved the thought of ending my day with positive words. So I started journaling too. My first entry said, "Today I learned a new word, hope." I used it in a sentence and it made me smile. Writing positive things not only improved my English but also made me feel happier. I still recommend journaling to anyone learning English. It helps with both writing and self-reflection. One day while journaling, I wrote down a goal that seemed impossible at the time. I wrote, "I want to speak English confidently in front of a big crowd." Yes, I wanted to become a public speaker someday. The idea scared me, but it also excited me. I knew I wasn't ready yet, but having this dream gave me something to work toward. Sometimes writing your goals, no matter how big or small, can light a fire inside you. If you have a goal, write it down. It's the first step to making it real. By this time, I had started to notice big changes in myself. My diary entries were becoming longer. I could follow conversations in English shows without needing subtitles all the time. And most importantly, I wasn't afraid of making mistakes anymore. Mistakes became my stepping stones. They weren't something to hide. They were something to use. For example, once I said, "I am boring," when I meant, "I am bored." Hazel laughed and said, "Don't worry, it happens to everyone." Her kindness reminded me that everyone, even fluent speakers, learns from mistakes. Another big change I noticed was in how I started connecting with more people. Before, my English felt like a wall. Anytime someone spoke quickly, I felt like I couldn't reach them. But now, that wall was turning into a window. I could understand more. I could speak more. And those small moments of connection felt incredible. For example, while shopping with Amelia one afternoon, we met a tourist who asked for directions. Amelia said, "Can you help them?" I hesitated but said, "Sure." I told the tourist, "Go straight and turn left." It was a short sentence, but it felt like running a sprint. That little moment taught me that confidence grows every time you try. Another thing I started paying attention to was pronunciation. One tricky word I struggled with was thought. The th sound felt difficult to pronounce. Amelia told me about a simple tip. Place the tip of your tongue against your top teeth and then say the word slowly. I practiced this over and over in front of the mirror. Eventually, I got it. The more you focus on tricky words, the faster they become easier. A huge milestone happened a year later during a school event. Our English teacher organized a storytelling competition, and Amelia encouraged me to participate. At first I said no. The idea of speaking in front of an audience felt terrifying, but Amelia said, "Take this chance. You've come so far. What's the worst that can happen?" Her words encouraged me. So I chose a simple fable to tell: The Lion and the Mouse. I practiced every day for a week. When the competition day arrived, I stood on the stage trembling, but I told myself, "You can do this." I spoke slowly, just like Amelia had always advised. By the time I finished, the audience clapped, and my teacher even gave me a thumbs up. That was the moment I understood the power of trying. The more you try, the braver you become. From then on, public speaking became something I loved practicing. At first, it was just small gatherings. Then I started participating in bigger group discussions. The fear I once had started fading, and excitement replaced it. The more I spoke up, the more confident I felt. English was no longer a subject for me. It had become a tool to express myself. All the while, I kept my daily habits. Listening to English audio, reading books, writing a diary, and even creating small conversations with myself. I once pretended I was a news reporter and practiced announcing headlines in English. It was silly but fun, and fun keeps you motivated. The more fun you have, the more you'll want to keep going. There's one last thing Hazel once told me that I'll never forget. She said, "Don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle." That was a powerful reminder. Often, I would look at fluent speakers and feel small. But Hazel's words reminded me that everyone has their own journey. Comparing yourself won't make you better. Practicing will. The more you practice, the quicker you'll see progress. With small victories fueling my confidence, I started to dream bigger. There was a world out there, new opportunities, new adventures that I wanted to discover. I realized that English wasn't just a language. It was a key. A key that could open doors to books I had always wanted to read, conversations I wished to have, and places I wished to visit. Slowly, my fear of learning faded, and excitement took its place. Every new word became an adventure, a challenge, yes, but also a joy. One person who inspired me deeply during this phase was our English teacher, Mrs. Grace. If Amelia was like a guide, Mrs. Grace was like a spark. Whenever anyone struggled, she didn't call them out or make them feel bad. Instead, she'd say with a warm smile, "Mistakes are proof that you're trying." It was her favorite saying, and she repeated it often. On tough days, it comforted me. Whenever I hesitated to read aloud in class or answer a question, I would remind myself of her words. It's okay to stumble as long as you're moving forward. Mrs. Grace had a habit of giving us small challenges. One month, she started a Word of the Day challenge. Each morning, she'd write a new English word on the board and ask, "Who can use this word in a sentence?" The first word she wrote was curious. I remember being too shy to participate on the first day, but I went home and made a note of the word in my notebook. The next day, she wrote generous, and by the third day, hopeful. On the fourth day, I raised my hand. My sentence was simple. I am curious about learning English. Mrs. Grace clapped, and everyone smiled at me. That tiny moment gave me so much courage. Around this time, Mrs. Grace introduced us to poetry. I didn't think I'd enjoy it at first. Poetry felt tricky, like it had hidden meanings. But Mrs. Grace chose simple poems to start with. One of them was Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. There was one line I couldn't stop thinking about. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep. To me, it felt like the author was reminding us that we all have responsibilities, no matter how tempted we are to stop and rest. This poem taught me that language isn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about feelings. It made me wonder, could I one day express myself so beautifully in English? Maybe. At home, I began reading poetry out loud. I loved how the words sounded when spoken slowly. They flowed, almost like music. Amelia encouraged me to write my own short poems in English. My first one was about the sky. It went like this. The clouds are soft, my heart feels light. The sun is bright, my dreams take flight. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was mine. Writing poetry helped me play with words and learn how to express deep thoughts in simple ways. One weekend, while cleaning the house, I came across an old English magazine my uncle had left behind after visiting. It had glossy pages and big, colorful pictures. Flipping through it, I found an article about the 7 wonders of the world. I started reading it slowly, word by word. Although I didn't understand everything, I absorbed as much as I could. There was a sentence that said, "The Great Wall of China is a testament to human achievement." I didn't know what testament meant, but I guessed it had to do with proof or greatness. I wrote it down to look up later. This moment reminded me how the world is full of stories, and through English, I could explore them, little by little. Around this time, Hazel and I started working on a fun project together in school. We decided to make a poster about kindness. We included words like help, respect, and love. At the bottom, we added the phrase, kindness is its own reward. It was something we had heard Mrs. Grace say one day in class. When we presented our poster, I was nervous, but something surprising happened. As I explained the words and their meaning, my nerves disappeared. Why? Because I felt connected to the message. You see, when you truly believe in what you're saying, it gives you confidence. That poster project taught me more than just English words. It taught me how to communicate with heart. My journey wasn't without its rough patches, of course. There were days when progress felt so slow, like trying to walk uphill against the wind. I remember one particular day when I had to write a short speech for class. The topic was, why education is important. I sat by my desk for hours, with books open and paper blank. I felt stuck. No ideas, no sentences, just doubt. I thought to myself, maybe I'm not good enough. But then I remembered Amelia's words. Don't try to be perfect. Just try. So I wrote the simplest sentence I could think of. Education helps us learn and grow. That one sentence gave me the courage to write another, and then another. By the end of the evening, I had completed my speech. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And when I delivered it the next day, my classmates clapped for me. Another helpful habit I developed during this time was listening to English while doing daily tasks. Whether it was washing dishes, tidying my room, or walking in the park, I played recordings in English. At first, it was hard to catch every word, but I didn't force myself to understand everything. Instead, I focused on the rhythm and tone of the language. Slowly, my ears became more attuned. I started to notice how certain phrases were used and how native speakers stressed particular words. The more you listen, the more natural the language feels. One unforgettable experience happened when my school took us on a trip to a nearby historical site. As part of the activity, each student had to explain one of the monuments to the group. I was assigned a small, beautiful garden in the center of the site. I remember practicing my explanation for hours. I kept it short and simple. This garden is over 100 years old. It was built to bring peace and beauty to visitors. When I stood in front of my friends to speak, my voice shook at first. But then, I saw Mrs. Grace nodding encouragingly, and I felt a wave of calm. After finishing, one of my classmates said, "You spoke so clearly." That compliment stayed with me for weeks. By now, I had started helping others who were beginning their own English journey. Amelia, Hazel, and I formed a small after-school group where we helped younger students practice reading and speaking. Watching them struggle reminded me of my own starting days. I would often say to them, "Don't worry about making mistakes. Just focus on trying. The more you practice, the better you'll get." Teaching others became a powerful way for me to improve too. It forced me to think carefully about words and how to explain them. The effort was worth it because I saw their confidence grow, and that made me feel proud. As my fluency improved, my dreams grew even bigger. I imagined myself traveling to places where English was spoken everywhere, walking the streets of London, visiting libraries in New York, or even attending an English-speaking university someday. These dreams felt far away, but they kept me motivated. Each day, I would take one small step closer. One word, one sentence, one story. Months passed, and my relationship with English grew deeper. It felt like I had unlocked a secret passage, a passage filled with endless possibilities. I began opening myself up to new challenges, even ones that seemed impossible before. One day, Mrs. Grace announced an essay competition, and she encouraged everyone to participate. When she looked at me and said, "You should give it a try," My heart skipped a beat. Writing an essay seemed like such a big task. How many words would I even be able to write? What if my grammar mistakes made people laugh? But that evening, I sat down with a notebook and pen, determined to at least give it a try. The topic was my role model. Without hesitation, I chose to write about Amelia. I began with, Amelia is the person who inspires me to be brave. Slowly, ideas started flowing. I wrote about how she encouraged me when I was scared to speak, how she taught me to enjoy learning without fear of judgment, and how she always managed to make English fun for me. By the time I finished, it wasn't just an essay. It felt like a heartfelt letter of gratitude. Submitting it felt scary, but I reminded myself, it's not about being perfect. It's about trying. A week later, results were announced. To my absolute surprise, I came in third place. I couldn't believe it. It had only been a year since I had started working seriously on learning English, and now I had placed in a competition. My essay wasn't flawless, but my effort had been enough to touch people. That taught me a valuable lesson. Even when you think you're not good enough, your work might inspire others. Keep going. After that, I wanted to challenge myself further. Mrs. Grace suggested I start reading more complex books. She recommended The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. At first, it felt intimidating. The sentences were longer, and some of the words were unfamiliar. But I applied the strategies I learned earlier, breaking down sentences into smaller parts and guessing the meaning of words from the context. The story of Mary, a lonely girl who discovers a hidden garden, mirrored my own journey in some ways. Just as she unlocked the beauty of the garden little by little, I felt like I was unlocking the beauty of English with every page. Another big turning point came when Hazel invited me to her house one weekend. Her family had a rule. During meals, they only spoke English. I thought, oh no, what if I say something wrong? But Hazel encouraged me again. She said, everyone makes mistakes. My parents will understand. That evening, I joined them for dinner and nervously said, can you pass the salt, please? Hazel's mom smiled and replied, of course. That one small exchange gave me the courage to join in more. We talked about school, food, and even the weather. By the end of the evening, I felt proud of myself for stepping outside my comfort zone. If you ever get the chance to practice English in a real-life setting like this, I highly encourage it. It's one of the best ways to learn. As I became more comfortable with speaking, I started paying closer attention to pronunciation. One thing Hazel's dad told me that night struck me deeply. He said, don't focus too much on sounding perfect. Your accent is part of who you are. Those words stayed with me. So many of us worry about having an accent when we speak English, but I came to understand that an accent is not a weakness. It's a story. It shows where you come from, and it makes you unique. The goal is not to lose your accent, but to speak clearly enough to be understood. After all, communication is about connection, not perfection. At school, my friends began noticing my progress. Some even came to me for help with their assignments or asked how I had built my confidence. This surprised me because just a year ago, I had been the one asking for help. Helping others felt like a full-circle moment for me. I would tell them the tricks that had worked for me, like practicing out loud, journaling, and breaking big tasks into smaller ones. One friend, Liam, told me, you make learning sound fun, not scary. That comment stayed with me. It reminded me of how Amelia and Mrs. Grace had helped me, and now I wanted to pass that same encouragement to others. One of the most exciting things I did during this time was start watching movies in English without subtitles. It was a big challenge at first. I couldn't understand every word, but I focused on the tone and expressions of the characters. I remember watching the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, starring Will Smith. The story of a man chasing his dreams against all odds moved me deeply. And there was one line from the movie that I wrote down immediately. Don't ever let someone tell you that you can't do something. That line became my motto. It reminded me that I was capable of achieving whatever I set my mind to, no matter how hard the journey seemed. As time went on, English became less of a subject for me and more of a companion. Whenever I felt sad or confused, I would turn to my favorite English songs or stories for comfort. They became a safe space where I could express emotions I couldn't always put into words in my native language. And that's the thing about learning a new language. It doesn't just grow your mind, it grows your heart. As my fluency improved, I started noticing how far I had come, and how much more there was to learn. I wasn't fluent yet. There were times when words escaped me, or I couldn't find the right way to express myself. Sometimes, native speakers would say something, and I'd only catch half of it. But I stayed mindful of one thing that both Amelia and Mrs. Grace constantly told me. Fluency isn't about knowing everything. It's about making yourself understood. That thought freed me from the pressure of being perfect. I reminded myself, if I can communicate, I'm succeeding. One day, I overheard two classmates talking near the school gate. One of them, Oliver, seemed frustrated. He said, "I'll never get better at English. The words just don't make sense." His friend nodded, but neither of them seemed to know what to do. I couldn't ignore them, so I walked up and said, "Can I share something that helped me?" They looked surprised but nodded. I told them about my practice routine, listening to simple stories, journaling, and using a notebook to write down new words. I also told them how much progress I'd made by speaking to myself in front of a mirror. They both laughed and said, "That sounds funny, but we'll try it." Seeing their enthusiasm reminded me that sometimes even sharing small tips can inspire someone else's journey. I started looking for new ways to push myself further. One of the most exciting things I did was join a small debate club at school. The debates were often in English, which made me nervous, but I saw it as an opportunity to practice expressing my thoughts. The first topic I debated was, should students wear uniforms? Yes or no? I was on the yes team, and I worked hard to prepare simple but strong points. During the debate, I spoke slowly and carefully, just as Amelia had taught me. I wasn't perfect, but I felt proud when I managed to express my ideas clearly. What I learned from the debate wasn't just vocabulary or grammar. It was the courage to share my opinion without fear. The more you speak, the more confident you feel. During this time, I also discovered the power of storytelling. Mrs. Grace encouraged students to write short personal stories about our lives. While writing mine, I realized how much joy it gave me to shape my experiences into words. My story was about a small act of kindness I had received from a stranger during a rainy evening, someone who shared their umbrella with me. Writing that story not only helped me reflect on gratitude, but it also made me feel proud of my English progress. When Mrs. Grace read it aloud to the class and said, "This was beautifully written," I felt like I had taken another big step forward. One weekend, I decided to take my English learning outside of the classroom entirely. I went to a nearby park with my notebook and sat on a bench. As I looked around, I challenged myself to describe everything I saw in English. "The trees are tall and green," I wrote. "Children are playing on the swings. The sky is bright, and the sun feels warm on my face." This exercise was simple, but it helped me practice thinking in English without worrying about anyone listening. It also taught me to appreciate small moments. I realized that English wasn't just a tool for school. It was a lens through which I could see the world differently. Around this time, Hazel invited me to join her church's youth group discussions, which were often conducted in English. The idea of speaking in a group scared me, but Hazel promised to sit next to me and support me. The first time I attended, I mostly listened, but when the group leader asked, "What's something that brings you joy?" I raised my hand and said, "Reading books makes me happy." It was a short sentence, but the group leader smiled and said, "That's wonderful." Their encouragement melted away my fear, and I began contributing more to the discussions in the weeks that followed. Engaging in real-life conversations like this was one of the most rewarding ways I practiced English. The more you participate, the more natural it feels. There was one specific moment during this phase that I will never forget. It happened at a family gathering where everyone spoke my first language, except for one guest, a friend of my cousin's from another country. No one else at the table could communicate with him, so my cousin turned to me and said, "You're good at English. Can you help?" I was nervous, but agreed. I introduced myself to the guest and asked basic questions. "How do you like it here?" "What's your favorite food?" To my relief, he smiled and answered. We ended up chatting for almost 20 minutes. When my family saw me speaking fluently like that, they were impressed. My uncle even said, "You've become our translator." That moment showed me how learning English could be used to bridge gaps and build connections. Another habit that boosted my progress was practicing shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to someone speak, like an actor in a movie or a speaker in an audio clip, and then try to repeat what they say exactly as they say it. At first, I struggled to keep up. The sentences felt too fast, and I stumbled over words, but I kept at it. One of my favorite speeches to practice shadowing with was Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream." His words were powerful, and his voice was inspiring. Every time I practiced, I felt like I was channeling some of his passion into my own. Shadowing became one of my favorite ways to work on pronunciation and rhythm. Let me share one last small but meaningful tip from this phase. Celebrating success. Too often I found myself focusing on what I couldn't do rather than what I had already achieved. Amelia noticed this one day when I was frustrated after a practice session and said, "Stop for a moment. Think about where you started and where you are now. Isn't that reason enough to celebrate?" She was right. That evening, I made a list of everything I had accomplished so far, reading a book, writing poems, speaking in a debate, and even helping others with their English. That simple act of reflection filled me with gratitude and pride. As the months turned into years, English became a part of who I was. It didn't feel like a subject or a task anymore. It felt like a friend, one that had opened so many doors for me. I wasn't just learning English to pass exams or impress others. I was learning it to experience the world in new ways, to share my voice, and to listen to the voices of others. Each new word, each new sentence, was a piece of a much bigger journey. One of the proudest moments of my learning journey happened in my last year of school. Mrs. Grace asked me to give a short farewell speech at our graduation ceremony, in English. My initial reaction was, "Me? Are you sure?" But she smiled and said, "I can't think of anyone better to inspire the students." Those words planted a seed of confidence in me. I spent weeks working on my speech, writing and rewriting, practicing in front of the mirror, and of course, asking Amelia and Hazel for feedback. On the day of the ceremony, as I stood on stage looking out at the room full of students, parents, and teachers, my hands were shaking. But then I took a deep breath, smiled, and began. I started by sharing my story. I talked about how I began my English journey feeling scared and unsure of myself, and how step by step, with the help of friends, teachers, and my own determination, I became confident. I ended my speech with a quote that had inspired me throughout my journey. "The more you try, the braver you become." When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then applause. People stood up, clapping and smiling, and I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. It wasn't just about the speech. It was about everything I had overcome to stand there and deliver it. After the ceremony, several students came up to me and said things like, "Your story gave me hope," or "You made me want to try harder in my English classes." Those words touched me deeply. It made me realize that when you share your journey, you don't just inspire yourself, you inspire others. Never underestimate the power of your own story. After school, I continued to explore English in different ways. I got more comfortable watching English news channels and interviews. I started reading longer books like Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which transported me to a magical world and introduced me to phrases like wand and spell. I even joined an online English-speaking group where people from all over the world practiced conversations together. Speaking to people from different countries taught me something important. Everyone has a different way of using English, and that's okay. Some people mix words from their own language with English. Others speak with unique accents. And yet the most important thing is that we can all understand each other. Hazel, Amelia, and I remained close friends, and our bond grew through our shared love of learning. Eventually, Amelia decided to pursue teaching herself, inspired by the work Mrs. Grace did for her, and for so many of us. Hazel continued her passion for writing and published short stories online. It amazed me to see how English had helped all of us in different ways. For me, it became the foundation of everything I wanted to do in life, whether it was traveling, learning more about the world, or helping others along the way. One special moment I'll never forget was my first trip abroad. I had always dreamed of traveling, and English made that dream possible. When I landed at the airport in London, everything felt surreal. It was my first time so far from home, and I didn't know what to expect. While waiting for my luggage, I asked an airport staff member, "Excuse me, where can I find the bus stop?" I said it with such confidence that the person smiled and gave me detailed directions. I couldn't believe it. I was really using English to navigate a different country. That trip taught me that English is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about connecting with people, no matter where you are. Another part of traveling that I cherished was meeting people. At one point during my trip, I visited a library and met a woman named Eleanor. She was sitting at a table reading a thick novel. When she saw me looking curiously at her book, she asked, "Are you looking for something to read?" I hesitated at first, but then replied, Yes, I'm learning English, so I'm looking for something simple. Eleanor beamed and said, "Learning a new language is brave. Here, let me help you find a book." She walked with me through the shelves, pulling out books I might enjoy. That small interaction reminded me that language can bring strangers together and turn them into friends. Over time, I developed a favorite saying that has stayed with me ever since. The more you learn, the more capable you become. It's a reminder that learning is a never-ending journey. Even now, after years of practicing and using English, I still learn something new every day. Sometimes it's a new word from a book, like perseverance or resilience. Sometimes it's a new idiom I hear in a conversation, like the ball is in your court, which means it's your turn to make a decision. And sometimes it's just discovering new ways to explain myself. Looking back, I realize how far I've come. There was a time when English felt like a mountain too high to climb, but little by little, step by step, I made my way up. It wasn't always easy. There were days when progress felt slow and mistakes felt discouraging. But with patience, practice, and support, I kept moving forward. The journey taught me more than just a language. It taught me courage, persistence, and the value of hard work. Now it's your turn. Wherever you are in your English journey, know that every step counts. Don't compare yourself to others. Remember that every expert was once a beginner. You don't have to climb the mountain all at once. Take it one word, one sentence, one practice session at a time. You're not alone in this journey. Millions of people around the world are learning just like you, and each one of you has the potential to succeed. The most important thing is to believe in yourself. When the road feels difficult, remind yourself why you started. Maybe it's to travel. Maybe it's to study abroad. Maybe it's to connect with people from different cultures. Whatever your reason is, hold on to it tightly. Let it guide you through the challenges. And always remember, the more you try, the easier it becomes. English is not just a language. It's a doorway to endless opportunities. It's a way to share your voice with the world and to listen to the voices of others. It's a bridge that connects us, no matter where we come from. So step forward with bravery and curiosity. Celebrate your small victories, learn from your mistakes, and keep going. You're stronger than you think, and the journey is worth it. As I reflect on everything I've shared with you today, I hope my story reminds you that learning is a process. It's not about being perfect or getting it right the first time. It's about showing up, practicing, and never giving up. You're doing incredible just by starting. Keep going. You've got this.